Excellent. Well, so welcome to the virtual Agile meetup. Today's session is not going to be too scary, I hope. Well, it depends what kind of environment you're in at the moment. But today we do have Johannes with us, who is returning, and we are going to be sharing with you how to save the world from Zombie Scrum. So hopefully that is all what you were expecting today. You weren't expecting anything on, I don't know, how to cook a sponge cake or anything like that, because you're still welcome, but this may be less interesting. Just to give you a bit of a heads up, so I am Helen Garcia, and my co-host is Ines Garcia, and we've been running the virtual Agile for quite a few years now. It kind of came out of lockdown all those years ago, and people asking, well, how are you still employed when you're virtual Agile coaches and Scrum Masters? And this kind of came about. So it's really good that it keeps going, and we still have people who are fairly interested. Just to talk a little bit about how we facilitate, we're fairly hands-off, so we like to give you be empowered to be able to off-mute yourself and all of that sort of stuff. But also for this particular session, we're going to take some questions at the end. So once Johannes has finished his talk, then feel free to take yourself off mute, to pop something in the chat if you don't feel comfortable with that. But go ahead and ask a bunch of questions. The session is recorded, as you know, as you can see. Like I say, we record the session so that we can share our knowledge with other people. Not everybody can work with this time. We all have different working patterns and living different places. So we like to be able to share this with lots of people. Time box is, what is it? It is 6 minutes past the hour. So we've got 54 minutes left, I believe. I usually get that wrong. But yeah, 54 minutes left of this session. And like I said, we do like to use the chat. So if you've got interesting things and you think, oh yeah, I can totally relate to that, or I've seen a subject here, or a bit of research here, then whack it in the chat. We love to share. Right, so next up, I am actually going to skip my rock, paper, scissors. If you're interested in this game, then do go ahead and find some other recordings and work out rock, paper, scissors. But we want to get really sort of straight stuck in to Johannes's session today. And I really quite liked this quote here, where it says, most zombie stories, the problems they solve are not the actual zombies. The problems they solve are human interactions. So there's me thinking, zombie scrum, that's got to be a right thing. It's got to be a good thing, right? A whole load of close-knit people thriving off each other's brains. Am I right? I don't know. I'm going to hand over now to our wonderful speaker, Johannes, who is going to tell us a bit more about how to save the world from zombie scrum. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Before I'm going to share my screen, I just wanted to complain and admit that I was too lazy to create a second set of slides. I'm going to speak in China in 2 weeks. And I'm using the slides for this, so don't be confused when you see some Chinese characters in there. However, I'm going to make it up to you as we have been sharing on LinkedIn. So if you make it through the session and you're still interested, at the very end, I'm going to have a discount code for the book for you, which is actually a significant discount using a really hard to guess promo code that you just need me to tell you because you're not going to guess it on your own. But this is something that I don't do very often, but I'm going to do it for you because you're cool people. And you also get to see the things I'm going to talk about first. So I've done some of this because we've been talking about Zombie Scrum for a while now, but I like to put a fresh spin on it. I might have put some material in there that is going to be part of my next book, maybe, definitely. And you're going to see that first, so you can count yourself lucky, I guess. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. This is what I'm talking about. So we're talking about how to save the world from Zombie Scrum. And so this is a topic that I've been working on with my collaborators, Barry and Christian. And initially, all three of us wanted to be here. But there was this incident that happened at the lab. So unfortunately, they were not able to make it. However, the doctors are measuring something that they believe might be brain activity. So it's not, they might be here in the future at some point. It's probably going to be a long road to recovery, but all the material I'm going to talk about was created by the three of us. The other two are more famous than I am. But I want you to know, so at any point, if there's anything that you find especially useful or interesting, that was my contribution. Okay, so anything in the book, that was something that I wrote in there, or anything I'm going to talk about that is going to help you further, that was me. And we have this pact where we talk bad things about each other when we're not there. So just so you know that. We're talking about the book you see on the screen here, the Zombie Scrum Survival Guide. We released this during the pandemic, which helped us to finish the manuscript before our deadline. It's now available in traditional and simplified Chinese, and it's also in Japanese, if you're interested. Maybe that is going to help you, I'm not sure. Something else. We wrote the book, and at the same time, we created this survey to diagnose Zombie Scrum, which turned into the Scrum Team Survey that Christian and Barry are still working on. Out of this also came this project where Christian and a professor from a university in Denmark actually looked at all the data that we had collected and wrote a peer-reviewed scientific paper on this. The link you can see in the right-hand corner there. And Jeff Sutherland actually called this one of the best white papers ever released on Scrum, because it deals with the actual effectiveness of of Scrum teams. So not just the theory, but what actually helps and what is measurable. And it actually, so what was quite interesting to see was that it confirms a lot of the things that we talk about in the book. So we were really confident about what we were writing about, but actually we now have proof that what we talk about actually exists, and also that the experiments that we talk about actually work. A bit more about me. I stole this from other presenters. So what you need apparently is you need a slide that talks about you in the third person. And that's what I'm doing right here. So I have exactly the amount of Agile experience that is going to make you trust my authority. So whatever that is, however many years, I have that amount of experience, and anything I say afterwards is going to make you convinced that I'm right. I also have all the right Agile certifications. So whenever you feel like I should have a lot, then I have a lot. If you feel like it's all a scam and I should have none, then obviously I have none. Also, you might have recognized my face because I did win a Mario Kart 64 contest in 1999 in the small town of Krefeld in Germany. And I've been chasing that high ever since, but I don't like talking here today. It's also pretty nice. I enjoy reading. I also like mixed martial arts. I'm not doing it myself. I like other people beating each other up for some reason. I think it's cool. I also enjoy cooking. And this, I'm telling you this for a reason, because inside of me, I have this idea that I would be a great chef. And I would love to tell you a story about that. This man here is called Dan Barber, and he's one of the most famous chefs in the world. You can see him in the Netflix show Chef's Table Season 1. And so I kind of admire what he's doing, but there was something in there that I saw that I thought was so fascinating and applies to our Agile world in such a distinct way that I would love to tell you the story. Dan Barber was thinking about the fact that in order to create this delicious menu for his guests, what he needs is the best ingredients. And then he was mentally tracing the step back of, I'm buying produce, where does the produce come from? And then at some point he realized something. So he thought about how what he is doing is that he's optimizing all his work around, or he's optimizing all his work for the element of taste. right? He wants to create something that tastes delicious, that people will come back for. But he also saw that the way that we farm and the way that we create produce is by optimizing for yield. So we want to have as much of this as possible, and it's actually not optimized for the thing that he was going for, right? And so he was thinking about the fact of what would it look like to have a farm or have some form of initiative that is just geared towards making the most delicious vegetables. And he started talking to professors from universities. And the interesting thing was that they told him, we've been doing this for decades, and no one has ever asked us to optimize for anything other than yield. And so this started this project when he started partnering with local farms. And he kind of kicked off this whole his whole thing where the farmers that he was working with were starting to grow their vegetables differently. And you can see in the show that he has these, for example, this dish where he just takes vegetables from the ground, he kind of cleans them a bit, maybe puts a bit of oil on them, and then this is how he serves them to people. And you can see their eyes pop and they eat like a carrot and just go like, wow, I never thought it could taste this way. And I would like you to kind of imagine working on a farm like this. So from the outside, it looks like a regular farm, right? So everything they're doing is like you see vegetables, but when you look closer, it's very different. So they have different methods, they have different techniques. They had to start looking into like what influences flavor. So no one really knew about this, so they had to start experimenting. They started doing these cycles of growing vegetables, then sitting down, tasting them, and then deciding what to do next. So do we want to increase the sweetness of this pepper, for example? Can we get a bit more crunchiness into this carrot? I always imagine what it's like if you're like a traditionally trained farmhand and someone would hire you at this farm and they would have to kind of re-explain to you what it is that you need to do. Like you use different kind of fertilizers. You have to talk about or think about crop rotation, something that usually doesn't occur when you just optimize for yield and do traditional kinds of farming. And I'm telling you this for a reason, because at this moment, I want you to kind of keep this in mind. So these optimizing factors kind of act as magnets for a whole lot of other things. So just this idea of what is it, what do we need in order to create a bit more taste has these trickle-down effects into like all kinds of different methods and also very different results, right? So the thing at the end is very different from what was traditionally done just because someone thought about what is it that we're actually optimizing for. So now I'm going to talk about Zombie Scrum because obviously this is related and I'm telling you this story for a reason. So this is Barry, Chris, and me. That was about 10 years ago. We were sitting down and we were talking about our experience using Scrum, and all of us had these great experiences working with teams, and we were really fascinated by it. And we also noticed that none of the other people that we talked to in our circle of friends had the same experience. So what we always heard was, especially in the past couple of years, people were talking about how in their organization, someone tried to kind of cram Agile into their style of working, and it didn't yield the results that they were looking for. And it was kind of this painful process, and it didn't really go well. And so we started, or we were kind of wondering why no one was talking about this. So you would have all these books about how to do Scrum in theory, how great Agile is, and then you have these just droves of people having this miserable experience. And there was such a big mismatch that we were just wondering, what is this? So we started investigating this. And one of the first things that we noticed was that we could kind of see that there were 4 distinct symptoms that always showed up again and again. And we started calling this Zombie Scrum because the main thing about this to us was that it felt so lifeless. So the thing that we appreciate about it, healthy Scrum, was that it felt so lively. So people were engaged. It was fun. There was a lot of motion in there and lots of dynamics. And then in these other environments, it just kind of felt flat and people were kind of doing these things, but it didn't really work out. And we found that, the first symptom that we described was that Zombie Scrum teams, they're usually disconnected from their stakeholders. They're not really in touch. They don't deliver valuable things. There's often a big distance between the actual source of a need and the people developing a solution. Then we saw that Zombie Scrum teams usually struggle to release increments early and often. So especially Scrum puts this whole focus on the working product increment that drives the whole feedback loop. And the teams that we encountered had difficulty releasing at least once a sprint and coming to or releasing a product that was close to production ready. The teams also showed few signs of improvement. So kind of everybody knew that this wasn't going well, but there was also no sign of things getting better anytime soon. So it was just like this repetition and this dysfunctionality, and people were kind of sad and burned out and didn't have anything to look forward to because they were like, well, at least it's getting better. And then finally, we saw that some Scrum teams, that they're usually unable to self-organize. We're going to look at what that means. But we believe that in order to use Scrum well, you need a bit more autonomy than usual. And we were seeing that these teams were lacking this autonomy. And while looking at these symptoms, obviously we were looking at kind of some root causes, or what was responsible for causing these symptoms. And it's similar to kind of this optimizing for yield, optimizing for taste. Like there's a mismatch. You could use one of the techniques or one of the approaches from one side. You might believe you could use it for the other thing, then you're not going to achieve what you're actually optimizing for. So if you use like a regular kind of fertilizer, for example, that might completely destroy your flavor. At the same time, if you're looking for the highest yield, you might be really disappointed if you only get a few tasty tomatoes, right? In our findings, the basic problem in these organizations was that there was a mismatch between what the organization was optimized for and what Scrum is optimized for. And that is something that I would like to explore a bit deeper. So I'm going to would like to show you this slide. There's a book, The Third Wave by Alvin Toffler, that I can really recommend. So that was written in 1980. And he talks about different waves of development in human society. So first one was agriculture, second one was the industrial age, and the third one is the information age that we're now entering. And he was making all of these predictions of what is going to happen. And I think he did a really good job of explaining some of the dynamics that we're seeing in the world right now. And he was kind of explaining why this was just bound to happen. But the other thing that I found most fascinating was his concise explanation of the industrial age. And while reading this, I was just struck by how the principle he was describing were exactly the ones that I had always seen organizational leaders implicitly optimizing for. So at some point, I kept paying a lot of attention when people were saying Scrum is not doing the thing that we were hoping it was going to do, or we didn't see the benefits. And then when I was asking, so what exactly were the benefits or are the benefits that you were hoping for? Then we could kind of start looking at these optimizing factors, or like what the values are that people were driving. And so in his book, Alvin Toffler is talking about these principles. I'm just going to mention them very briefly. I think it's really good for you to understand these, but you can look them up in his book, or you can even have like ChatGPT give you a good summary of these. First one is standardization. So what we often forget is that before the Industrial Revolution, the work processes were often not professionally organized. And there was significant variability in the way people did their work. And some of you probably know that this is something that Winslow Taylor started changing. So he looked at different steps in manufacturing, and then he was trying to find the optimal way to perform one task and then train people in that one optimal way. This is highly effective for repetitive tasks in a controlled environment, like we're seeing in the picture. So you can actually control all of the variables. You know exactly what you're producing. And what this usually leads to is an increase in quality. It lowers the production costs and increases output significantly. And the end effect is a more affordable product. Then second, we have specialization. So once you standardize things, you can so the workers become highly skilled in a very narrow field of work, or at performing specific tasks efficiently. This limited range of tasks also means they're less versatile workers, and that is something that we still see today in functional silos and organizations. So we still kind of use this logic because it often is actually very efficient, that we kind of create these functions in organizations where people are very specialized to do one specific thing. Now, when we have standardized our work practices and have specialized workers, what happens is, since no one is kind of owning the whole process anymore and creates one of the like one unit of our product by themselves, we need to synchronize all these different work steps, right? And this is where kind of this meticulous planning is coming in, where we need to make sure our machines are used efficiently, and that one group of people, they depend on the output of another group of people. And so we need to start synchronizing the work processes in order for these to work most efficiently. This is only possible when we have concentration. So when we get lots and lots of people together in one place to actually put this specialization into effect. So we often forget that before the Industrial Revolution, the organizations would usually be owned by a single family and would rarely be larger than, like, for example, a dozen people, right? This changed during the industrial age and made all of these things that I just talked about possible. So, and then we have maximization, which I'm going to talk about first because I'm going to change the order on this slide after this talk. But when we produce goods in larger quantities, it drives down prices. And that is something that was one of the key achievements, that we could just make everything bigger, and then the prices of our units kind of drop. And then finally, we have centralization that most of you should be intimately familiar with, that decision-making was centralized, and that we had this division in organizations where the top management was responsible for making all the decisions, and the average worker kind of reporting upwards and providing information, but the directives always flowing down from the top. And most organizations still function by this logic. And I'm kind of inviting you to kind of reflect on this and ask yourself, where do you see this play out in your own organization? So in my opinion, what we see most often is, like I already said, functional silos. We have this centralized decision-making. And when all these things are in place, we kind of run into troubles when we want to make our teams agile and when we want our teams to use Scrum. And it's kind of interesting if we kind of take a step back and look at, why do we even use Scrum in the first place? So what is actually Scrum there for? And this is the illustration that we made. It starts with the fact that in complex work, more is unknown than known. And the principles that we just saw, they still apply today, but they apply to problems that you can actually analyze. They apply to environments that you have more control over. And Scrum, as it says in the Scrum Guide, is a framework for solving complex problems or finding adaptive solutions to complex problems. And that is one of the key things. So there's when we're talking about optimizing factors, like this is one of the key assumptions that we just think, okay, more work, more is unknown than known. That is something that we just have mid, and this is actually like the key starting point for Scrum. The unknown is discovered by releasing done increments early and often. So as I said, Scrum has this high focus on the working product increment because this is what creates feedback. And so point 3 is with these increments, we validate assumptions, right? So we have assumptions and we release a product increment, and that is how we actually create the feedback that helps us learn. We learn what is needed and avoid the risk of spending time and money on the wrong things. And as a result, we can deliver more value to our stakeholders sooner. Almost every time I work with Agile teams, no one has ever explained this to them, or especially organizational leaders. No one took the time to just go like, hey, what is it that you're looking for to do in your daily work life? What is this framework, this tool that you're looking at? What is this designed to do? And do these things match? And this is exactly where we run into problems and when we use when we call Zombie Scrum. And so this whole, like what I talked about is really captured in the 3 pillars of Scrum, which are transparency, inspection, adaptation. Because this is, in a nutshell, what I just talked about, and this whole loop of taking action, looking what is happening, and then adapting the way we work towards our goals. And that is the heart of Scrum, and this is what doesn't fully come alive in Zombie Scrum organizations. It's to look at this in more detail, which I think you're interested in, is so to look at this in more detail, it's interesting to look at what characterizes healthy Scrum, and this is how we divided the book. So there's an introduction, and then we talk about the 4 dimensions of healthy Scrum, and the way we present them is that these are kind of like broad ambitions that you can use to, first of all, kind of assess your own organization and see how are we doing in this regard. But it also points you in a direction of maybe you want to get closer to this ideal, right? And these 4 dimensions, so the first one is build what stakeholders need. Second one is ship it fast. And the third one is improve continuously. And finally, we have self-organize. I'm going to go through all of these. I'm going to explain what we talk about when we look at these dimensions. And in the book, we have more than 40 experiments. So it's 41. We always talk about it's more than 40 because it sounds really cool. We have 41 experiments that you can try in order to improve your own situation. What we found out was when we were talking to people that almost no one has the ability to change a system overnight, to make like this huge change. And so what is more valuable to people are these small experiments that you can try in order to make an improvement. And that is what we provide in the book. And for each one, I'm going to give you one experiment that you can try, and you can find the other one in the book that you can get at a significant discount when you make it through the session. So when we talk about build what stakeholders need, what is interesting is that, I don't know if you ever noticed, but the Scrum Guide doesn't define what a stakeholder is. And that is one of the bigger problems. And we think, or the 3 questions that we're sharing in the book to identify stakeholders is, the first question is this person using or going to use the product on a regular basis? Then, is this person investing significantly in the development of the product? And the third one, is this person deeply invested in solving a challenge that your product addresses? It's really important to clearly identify your stakeholders because, as we're going to see, this word is used in very different ways, and it's going to mean very different things. And you can say kind of like, so all of the teams that we studied were kind of like, yeah, totally in touch with our stakeholders all the time, totally delivering value to them. But when you start asking these questions, then people started to think. And so coming back to this idea of industrial revolution logic, what we most often see in an organizational design is kind of this this structure that business and IT are still almost completely separated. And business is the thing that kind of defines what needs to be done, and IT is the thing that delivers the solution to the business. Barry likes to tell the story of a client he worked with, and that was the inspiration for this picture, where business and IT were in fully separate buildings. So you actually had to walk quite a long way to talk to any of the business people. And we see this this division sometimes physically, but usually like structurally in an organization. And the way that communication happens is that we have contracts or requirements documents or something like that that are being kind of pushed between these entities. And lots of teams, they see the business as their stakeholders and kind of just try to satisfy what they need, regardless of this is actually going to provide a good solution to the business as a whole. Usually, like, we see this long chain of people, where initially, like the top left, there's someone who has a clear, distinct need, and they have to relay it to someone else, who in turn hands it off to someone else, and then like this long chain in an organization until finally someone works on it. But so this game of telephone usually distorts the actual need, and there's no direct communication between the people building the solution and the people who need that solution. We often see this play out, for example, in product owners just taking these demands from someone else and just handing them off to the team. So I've worked with clients who had these big project documents, these requirements documents, and the product owner was responsible for turning these into user stories for a sprint. And then nothing else changed. It was just like you take things from the document. In Scrum, we use these user stories, and then you just translate them, and then something good is going to come out in the end. There's a reason why a product owner is called a product owner. So first of all, there's a product, and second of all, this person actually owns the product. And we usually have a very weak product owner role in Zombie Scrum teams. What this leads to is, again, we have these divisions in an organization, and there are people on the outside who really need a solution, but there's no contact between the people building that solution and the people having that need. And so one experiment that we recommend, for example, is just kind of making this visible. We call it the customer distance metric. You can take regular or typical work items that a team works on and kind of trace them back throughout the entire organization. And then you can make a map of how many hops or many stops it takes from the initial need until it reaches that team. And then you can start talking about like what would decreasing the distance do, and what would it take in order to make a significant progress with that. I also would like you, in this case, what you can do is, there are a couple of questions that you can ask yourself. Like I said, reflecting on your own team, who exactly are your stakeholders? Are they the source of the need, or are they just passing on information from someone else? So we often have these proxy product owners or proxy stakeholders, or people talk about customers, but when you ask, it's just this person from this business division, and they actually talk to the customers. How do you interact with your stakeholders? What would be different if you were closer to your stakeholders, and what is keeping you from closing the distance? It's not that like this extremely tight communication is always the best, but just reflecting on these questions of maybe, there could be some benefits, and what would these benefits look like, that is usually a good idea. That is the part of working with the stakeholders. It's this aspect of the value that we're creating. So we want to ship something that is valuable, clearly valuable to someone, something that helps us achieve business goals. And that is why we look at the interaction with the stakeholders. The second dimension is, so we call it ship it fast. Again, I want to draw attention to the fact that Scrum really depends on this product increment to work fully. And we have a lot of unknown things and a lot of assumptions that only really get answered once we fully release a product increment. And the closer we get to the state, the better the quality of the information is that we gather. So the goal should usually be to get as close to this release state as makes sense for your business, and to release more often and earlier, right? Just because it helps us, again, we assume that there are so many things that we don't know, and it helps to get your product in a state of production readiness in order to generate more valuable information. This depends on what product you have. It depends on your organization, clearly, but this is a dynamic that you can usually describe that is generally production readiness helps a lot with flexibility, and that is what we're looking for when we use Scrum. Most Zombie Scrum teams, for them, it kind of looks like this, where they're often just not able to get to this state and actually release often. So for them, like in a sprint, like it works on my machine is kind of the product increment, or like we've shipped it off to the testing department. And I get how difficult that is. Like if you have this legacy monolith that it just takes you 2 weeks to deploy, that is definitely difficult. I feel your pain, but it makes a lot of sense if the flexibility that Scrum can provide you, if that is beneficial to your business, it makes a lot of sense to invest in making getting your product into a state where it's much easier to release early and more frequently. Most teams are also hampered by some form of governance in the organization. So we still have these, often we have these Scrum teams, but they're operating in an environment that is still heavily project-based. Often they work in these, or we kind of have these multi-year projects, and now they're doing these iterations in there, but the actual full release only happens at the very end. You can do that, but again, so the information gain doesn't happen until you ship the whole thing, right? And it kind of counteracts the effect that we want in Scrum, that we create this information that is going to give us insights into what really works. Another thing is that the teams we work with often have these huge requirements, so it's very difficult for them to slice things smaller to continuously provide value. So they use sprints, but actually they work on something that is going to stretch across multiple sprints, and they kind of need to reuse, and they're still doing like this big batch project management. Because it's just they don't have any experience slicing things in such a small in a way that they can release valuable increments frequently. And all of this, so again, it just kind of leads to this situation of working on things for such a long time that sometimes the moment just passes. So when I talk about Scrum being a great tool for solving complex problems, that usually means we operate in a dynamic environment, and that often means that there are opportunities that just pass us by because we're not quick enough. So shipping fast is essential. Getting to that shippable product increment is really essential. Again, one way, so this is the experiment that I'm offering. One way of doing this is to map this out. So this was inspired from like a lean perspective, where you take these work items and you measure how long it takes from start to finish. And what we usually see is that these Zombie Scrum teams have these very long lead times because before they start work, they need to do something, or a lot of things happen. And then after they finish their work, it takes a lot of time for things to go into production. So these could be, like I said, testing teams, release teams. And this is, again, if our goal is flexibility, this doesn't help us. So it helps to kind of map this out and look what is really happening. And then this could be a good input for a continuous improvement process that we're going to talk about next, because it gives you this kind of map of what would it take in order for us to shorten these lead times, and make it easier to release earlier. Questions that you can ask yourself. So how close to production ready are your increments? If there's like a production system that you have, how close do you get? What would be different if the product increments were closer to production ready? What is keeping you from getting them close to production ready? And what would be different? So what benefits would you have if you could release increments earlier and more frequently? So maybe not just like once or twice a year, but what if you actually could release multiple times a week, for example? What would that enable for your business? Then we're going to look at the third dimension, which is improve continuously. Like I said, most Zombie Scrum teams don't improve very much. So they're kind of stuck in their behaviors. And we use this concept of double loop learning from Chris Argyris in the book. So this explains that most of the time we just kind of do our actions and then reflect on like how can I do this thing a bit better, right? And double loop learning is this process where you take a step even further back and you look at the rules and beliefs that kind of inform your actions. So why do we do what we do? Reflecting on these optimization factors, for example, is like a deep double loop learning exercise. And most of the time, Zombie Scrum teams don't get to this deeper level where they really reflect on why are we doing Scrum in the first place? Why are there certain practices in our organization? What were they designed for, and how do they help us? What we often forget is that we don't just have like driving forces or forces for change. We also have restraining forces. So there are these dynamics in our organization that work on keeping things stable and keeping them the same. And I firmly believe that it's important to look at these and honor them, but also talk very openly about them. So it's not a good idea to just kind of say this needs to change because the Scrum Guide says so, but it's really important to kind of say, I think we optimize for this thing, or these processes are in place because of this. I have a different alternative that is even better than what we had before. Most of the time, if you're just in this loop of doing your retrospectives and reflecting on the last sprint and just kind of asking what went well, what didn't go so well, that is not going to kick you into this double loop process. So I firmly believe you should regularly take a step back and ask deeper questions. And if you're in a Scrum Master position, I can just encourage you to not just reflect on small timeframes, but also on larger things like organizational goals, team goals, the processes that are existing in your organization, the environment around your organization, and that is really going to help you make a difference. Because if you don't, I don't know if you've seen, but there's a lot of talk about Agile is dead, and at the moment, and I think one of the contributing factors is that there was this notion that Agile is people-centric, and then some people took it a bit too far. So it was just about like, you need to feel good, and what can I do to make you feel more comfortable at work, and everything should be fun. It should never be challenging. And that often led to very ineffective teams. So we also call this happy clappy Scrum, where everybody's happy, but no one gets any work done, or like you don't actually make any kind of impact. So this is my warning for you. We describe several experiments in the book. For today, I chose one of the liberating structures. So for improving continuously, I cannot recommend liberating structures enough. So last time I was here, I had the chance to introduce you to liberating structures. You can find them, all of them, online for free. This is called social network webbing. You can have a look at it. Most of the time in organizations, you're not able to change the bigger things by yourself. So it really helps to kind of make this map of who you have access to, who is in your network, in order to change bigger things. And the way I recommend doing this is that you really think about, like, who do I know right now? I can just go to them, don't need any kind of introduction, but also who are the people I don't have access to? How could I get access to them? But I also need kind of this pitch of, hey, I need your help improving this thing, and the outcome is going to be X, Y, Z, because like this is really going to be in our interest. And my recommendation is involve more people. Just don't do it on your team level. You probably going to, like, if you want to change any kind of organization, you need a lot of people that are going to help you. For this part, questions you can ask yourself: what mechanisms for continuous improvement are active in your environment? Do you just do retrospectives? What do they look like? What is keeping you from improving continuously? So if you're not able to really make progress, what is it that is so difficult? Maybe it's tied to values and beliefs that make sure things stay the same. If so, what are they? Can you describe them? Can you talk to people about these? And what are the few problems that once solved would really make a difference? So I'm a firm believer in that we have thousands of problems, but it's really essential to identify the few ones that you should focus on, and that really going to, like, they're going to really move the needle by quite a bit. All right, then finally we have self-organize. Funny story. So while we were, or the book was in the publishing process, and in the book we point out that the Scrum Guide talks about self-organization or self-organized teams when it actually means self-managed teams. And then while it was in production, the Scrum Guide was changed, and now it's called self-managing teams. I like to believe that it was because we were writing about this. I don't have any proof. It also doesn't make any sense, but that's what I like to believe. So Scrum talks about self-managing teams, and what I would like to point out, it's not like self-management in itself is not the key to all the things, but yes, it does help a lot with flexibility. This is kind of the ideal image where you have teams that identify the most pressing issues, but they're also able to take care of those themselves. So they don't always need to coordinate with other people. They have the ability to make their own decisions. They have the tools that they need. They have the skills in the team in order to process these problems. What we see most often is that Zombie Scrum teams are unable to do this. And what people like to do is they like to take solutions from other contexts and apply them to their own. So they kind of like to go, oh, I read about this online, I'm going to try this. I'm not sure what it's for, but it sounds great. And I'm sorry, but you cannot skip the work. You do need to analyze your own context. You need to find something that really works for for your own environment. And that is part of this self-management or self-organization. Also, again, this is the impediment pyramid by Dominic Maximini that I really like. In the beginning, you're probably going to focus a lot of time on like a basic understanding of Scrum and things like Scrum team formation. But once the team gets more experienced, you're going to spend more time looking at engineering practices, adjacent process, or the organizational process. And I believe a big focus should be on, like, how can we create a bit more autonomy for our teams? Like, how can we design an organization in which teams can make better decisions that relate to their own process and their own product that they are working on? And I think that is one of the best services. So again, if you're in a Scrum Master position, I believe, the team is going to understand Scrum pretty quickly. But if you can actually help them be more effective by not having to coordinate with other people all the time or asking for permission all the time, that is really going to make a big difference. Dependencies really play into this. So since Zombie Scrum teams often operate in organizations with a lot of functional division, they depend on a lot of other teams and other people in order to get their work done. And one way of making this visible is by using something that we call permission tokens. So you kind of define, it could be Legos or marbles or something like that. So you as a team, you kind of look at what are the most common dependencies that we have on other teams. And then each time you run into this, you drop a marble into a jar or a Lego brick. And then at the end of the sprint, you can just kind of empty it and look at like how many times did this happen? And you take the ones where you have the highest number of items, and then you really get into like, what can we do to minimize this dependency? So instead of just managing it, is there a way to get rid of this? So for example, do we need someone else on our team? Do we need additional training? Do we need permission that we can ask for? And this really helps you make this visible, because most people run into this all the time, never talk about it. So that is permission tokens, something that I enjoy doing. And questions you can ask yourself, what is your team's sphere of autonomy? So what can you decide? What is kind of off limits? What would be different if your team had more autonomy? How would you know if your team had too much autonomy? We can also take it too far. So it's not just about like maximum autonomy is always the aim. We need to calibrate this, and you should ask yourself the question like, when is it too much? What are the dependencies that you keep running into? What would it take to minimize those dependencies instead of just managing them? All right, so those are the 4 dimensions of Zombie Scrum. Again, you can find much more information in the book. You always go by like, these are the symptoms you might see. We explain why things are important, and then we provide experiments that you can try in order to make a difference in your environment. In closing, if you want, you can take the Zombie Scrum survey. So at survey.zombiescrum.org, it's free. I think it provides a lot of value, even when it's free. It's surprising. Krista and Barry put a lot of work into this. I've changed your perspective on a cornfield, or next time you walk past a farm, I hope you kind of think about optimization factors and what that means for your organization. I think we can build a better world together. It's going to rain unicorns, and we can beat Zombie Scrum, even though all signs point to not likely at this moment. But we've gotten some really good feedback, and people write regularly that they actually managed to make a difference. We work with teams all the time, and there is hope, and I just want to kind of transmit this hope to you. If this was helpful, so this is me. As you can see, you can find more information on zombiescrum.org. You can write to me, email or LinkedIn. I actually answer any messages I get. People usually don't, but I'm happy when you do. So this is my invitation. If you have further questions after this, maybe if you forgot what the discount, the promo code was, because it was difficult to remember, then you can also ask me. And yeah, thank you very much for your time. I'd love to take some questions if you, I don't know, we have 2 more minutes, but maybe you can stay a bit longer.
Yeah, go for it, John.
I just wanted to say thanks. I have to dash in 1 minute, sadly, but I just wanted to express a huge amount of thanks, because this was a really enjoyable presentation. I feel like I learned a lot, and it did the thing of putting into words something which I've sometimes felt. So I just wanted to chime in and say that I've got to dash, but this was really good.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that is actually kind of my personal aim, that I want this, I want people to be able to speak about this. And often these things are invisible. And once you make them visible and kind of give people the vocabulary, then things can start changing. And so thank you very much. That is something that I really love to hear. Anything else? Just unmute yourself. Go for it.
I'm curious, Johannes, you've got 4 dimensions.
Yeah.
Was there a fifth dimension or a short one that you thought, I know 4's better than 5? Is there, or what would be your fifth dimension?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So actually, it is precisely 4, and we put a lot of work into. So the process of this was that we kind of collected all the questions that we would ask, or like that's all the signs that we would say we believe Scrum is working, and like this is how we know it's not working. And these 4 dimensions always came up, and so this kind of made it easy for us to kind of make them precise. The thing is that if you want to read the white paper that I pointed to, there's in the self-organization part, there's another thing in there that is that has shown itself is that management support for Scrum teams is absolutely essential. And so that is kind of in this self-organization dimension. If we were to write this book again, I might call it something else to also emphasize this, what I was talking about. So paradoxically, in order to have autonomy, you need this management support, right? So you cannot do that by yourself. And I would keep the dimensions the same, but I think I would name this one slightly differently. Anyone else?
I have a quick question. There was one thing discussed, getting closer to the stakeholders. So does it bring only goodies, or there could be drawbacks of doing that as well? So what is the right balance?
Yeah, that's so what's difficult often to relay is that like shipping fast, for example, it's not a black and white, and it's not always like you get as close as possible. What I think is crucial is that usually this is a process that takes a long time. So if there are benefits to getting closer to your stakeholders, you also need to make sure this can actually work. So if you kind of have this big distance and then you do like a cold start where you expose people to, for example, customers, and they've never talked to anyone before, then that is probably going to be very difficult and not something that you want. At the same time, from my experience, you also need to kind of balance the product owner role and the stakeholder role. So you don't want to get into a situation where your stakeholders solely define what you do and you kind of react to every quick idea that they have because you just want to satisfy them. So I believe that's where the product owner really comes in to prioritize things and give a longer term direction. So the Scrum guide now speaks of a product goal, for example, that can really help in this regard, where the product owner keeps like the longer term perspective in mind. But those are just some of the things that could potentially impact that interaction negatively. So I think this, I'm guessing this is also what you wanted to point out, that you always, so it's not just push as hard as you can in this one direction, but really look at what would be different if this were the case. What would be the benefits? What would change for the positive for us? And what do we need to invest in order to make this happen? And then see how these how these relate and make decisions based on that.
Hi, really interesting session. I have to say, it confirms I've never been a fan of Scrum, and the stories that you tell sort of, I mean, what attracted me to this session was just hearing, listening to the stories you tell. I mean, there's a number of, time doesn't permit, there's a number of things that I didn't like about Scrum, but I mean, picking one of them, you talked about the fact that the teams are not, are not close to the stakeholders and the damage that does. I would agree completely that getting teams closer to stakeholders is really valuable, and you sort of touch on it both in your diagram and what you just said now. That one of the problems that you have in any organization, and certainly in my experience, is that stakeholders don't agree. And that, one story on a project I wasn't involved with that I heard was that I work in the not-for-profit charity sector, that they were building a fundraising system, and they ended up building 3 separate invoicing modules because there were 3 separate teams, each of whom wanted to do invoicing different. And I think where, I'm sufficiently old to remember, waterfall-based approaches, and sometimes actually spending some time up front, getting stakeholders together to try and identify the commonalities and to try and identify a generic, flexible solution, even before you start building, to my mind, is really valuable. I'll just chuck out one thing that you might find interesting. I don't know if anybody's come across adaptive spaces, sorry. It's a technique that has come out. It came out of General Motors, in fact, of all places. But the people behind it talk about a process of conflicting and connecting. That there's always conflict on projects, and actually, I mean, you talk again about happy clappy. That actually I mean, what I've come to realize late in life is that conflict, if done well, actually is a good thing. You get better solutions, but it takes time, I think, to find ways forward that actually work for everybody. And often those solutions are better than you would have got had you just rushed ahead and built something. So I mean, what I'm saying goes against a lot of the sort of fundamental precepts of Agile, but I think you're sometimes taking time over something. Before, I mean, I'm a fan of dual track. I don't know, Jeff Patton, dual track Agile, where you have 2 separate streams. You have a stream that's doing that sort of upfront work with the stakeholders and getting involved with them, and there are people from the development team that are involved. But I don't know. I mean, I think you've highlighted a lot of interesting problems that to me were not surprising, and a really interesting session.
So I'm currently working on my next book, and I think it's going to go into more detail about Agile in general. And most people, unfortunately, don't have the capacity, just because they've never been exposed to the principles of agility have never really been fully explained to them. They cannot really make good decisions. So often people will just go like, no, this is the way to do it, and this thing says how to do it, so we just need to do it this way. But I mean, ultimately, we just want to solve problems most effectively. And this really depends so highly on context that you have to really look at what is it that we're trying to achieve. What is our environment at the moment? How do we need to adapt to this? And this could, for example, mean not using Scrum at all. Maybe it's just not what you need in your environment. Maybe it's not suited to your challenges, but maybe it is. And maybe it makes sense to invest in a change, but it should always come from this perspective of what does it enable us, and like how does it solve our problems, and not like just how do we do it because this document says that's how we do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think Agile is good in that what you should be aiming for is, and again you touched on this, is maximizing early learning. Learning that is based on sort of practical experience. But I think there are a lot of axioms in Scrum in particular that I think, because sometimes people's first reaction to something is not necessarily they're learning as they go along what they say they want versus what they actually want when they get their hands on it.
100%.
And finding way, and therefore I mean, to pick up another sort of axiom, which is
I'm really sorry, Richard. It's really interesting what you're talking about. I love it, and I'm really pleased that you've come to bring some of these thoughts, because you're quite right. There's a lot of bad examples out there, isn't there? I'm just, if it's okay, just to ask one more question from the chat.
No, I mean, I have a habit of talk. I mean, this is a really interesting topic, but I was just going to say that sometimes there are other ways of discovering things other than building working software. And a lot of the work I've done, we've just built bits of software that are just fragments, that is nowhere production quality. But if you're going to throw it away, why spend all that time turning it into production quality software? And there are lots of ways of learning, and working software is one of them, but there are lots of other ways. Backs of envelopes, I think, are still...
So thanks, Richard. We're going to just move on to the next question, if that's all right, which I'm going to read out a quick question, because we pride ourselves on finishing on time, but I think it was mainly my fault. So there's one here, though. In my last 2 projects, I found that they hired allocated people with little experience in the tech stack they were going to use to build the product. How would you approach this? This business was still expecting this to be delivered with no delays or little delays.
Yeah, that's just a really bad situation to be in. So listen, I coach a lot of other Agile coaches, and often I would not want to trade. And I guess this is one of those examples, because okay, this might sound cynical, but in my experience, there's this idea that organizations are governed by intelligence and rational thought. And my experience is that most of the time that's actually not true. So you can make like a really good argument, but that doesn't mean that people are going to listen to you. I would still try to go for it and just outline what the problems are. I'm not sure who made that decision and what ability you have to influence the decision. My first impulse would be to just clearly outline what the problems are and why this is difficult, and hope that someone is going to listen. Again, my experience tells me that often people will be like, yeah, tough, you still have to do it. And then just, sorry, this sounds very generic, just make the best of it. But yeah, I don't have much more than this, because it's you're often put into these kind of impossible situations that you cannot really solve. The social network webbing that I showed could be one of the approaches where you just to include more people. So again, this is not about like dirty politics or anything, but if possible, make a good, clear case in taking the organization's interests into account, and then argue from that perspective and try to include more people.